topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Are you ready for Insights to Incite? Ready or not, it's showtime. Now get ready to listen in and watch right here on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Join us and together we will escape the mundane. Insights to Incite, here is your host, Brandon Lawson.
True friends are people who care for one another more in spite of than because of. Betty Carlson. Today is Thursday, February 3rd. This is your host and friend, Brandon Lawson. How many of you have known someone that seemed to be our friend, and yet when we fell in hard times, they abandoned us, seemingly got up and left and were nowhere to be found and went the other way, leaving us in our pain and distress? Have you ever been there? Been on the receiving end of that? I mean, any of us, anyone who is of age has undoubtedly heard of someone, heard of a person who is such a type. And perhaps you have actually been on the receiving end of that. Well, do you want such a friend? Are you such a friend? No. No, and the reason I say no is because such a person is not a friend. You might call them a fan, but not a friend. And a fan and a fair-weathered fan at that. But we certainly wouldn't describe them as a diehard fan. Author Kyle Idleman wrote a book which I believe might have been turned into a whole series. It's titled Not a Fan. And he speaks of the way God doesn't want people who will run the other way when things start to go wrong. He doesn't want someone who's just a fan. He wants people who are devoted, dedicated. He wants his followers to be truly followers, committed. And within it, it talks about how we have a tendency to, when things are well, we believe God is good. And then when we fall in hard times, things start to go south, and stuff goes wrong, we have a tendency to see God through a different lens. And we may even question whether he really is for us. We might even come to the conclusion that he's actually against us. Yes, we might even feel unloved by the very one whose essence is depicted and described as love. Friends, hopefully you and your family, as well as your friends, are doing well. But if not, it is in these moments that you or they are in greater need of a friend than you would be otherwise. Yes. Let's, if I may encourage us, let's not be a friend only because of. Let's choose to be that friend even in spite of. Today, we are in lesson 4 in the RUA series. But before I get into the lesson, I do want to take a brief moment to mention the 2 specials I'm offering this month. The first one is a coaching special. And Roxy, if you want to bring that banner up, there we go. The Fantastic February fee. If you schedule 3 months and book them, and when you book it, that means you pay for it. If you do it this month, then the first coaching session is free. So that is the coaching special. And then the speaking special that I'm offering this month, this has to do with Fantastic Fridays fee. And if you call in or email, if we actually come to agreement where you book, and again, this would require payment, you book me for speaking on any Friday this month, on any Friday in the month of February, there will be $55 off the fee for that speaking engagement. So those are the 2 specials we're offering this month. And so Rua asks, are you a because of person or an in spite of person? Are you a because of person or are you an in spite of person? Which one are you? You might recall that 2 weeks ago in my lesson, I asked the question, are you a gracer or are you a grumbler? That is, are you a gracious person or a person who grumbles? And within that lesson, I shared that rarely am I one who would be depicted as gracious, especially when it comes to overlooking, dirty treatment. I have a real issue in looking past those who are just outright rude and heinous, evil. I'm not one who is likely to do that. I tend to lean more towards justice. I want justice served. So, in that respect, you would not classify me as being gracious. Yet, on the other hand, I am one who is more than happy to and will gladly bless others who have done nothing for me, or if anything, it wasn't much, and occasionally it's nothing at all, have not done a thing for me or to me to even deserve it. Yes. I'm in that respect, you know, I I'm not concerned whether you've earned my blessing. That doesn't even come into play with me. You don't have to earn it for me to give it. And in fact, if you earned my blessing, then it would not be an act of grace For as we know, grace is not earned, it's freely given. So I don't even give thought to whether you have earned my blessing, although I will consider whether you have forfeited my blessing. Because if you're, mean, nasty, hateful, if you're just a total jerk of such, well, then I'll gladly withhold my blessing. So, in light of that, as I read at the outset, or I mentioned at the outset of this show, the quote from Betty Carlson: true friends are people who care for one another more in spite of than because of. And within that quote, you can see both ways of grace being shown. I mean, as you consider, care for one another more in spite of than because of, that could be, in spite of how rude you were. I'll care about you, So that's the one side, as we just spoke of with grace. Or it could be the fact that you haven't done anything for me. It's not that you've done anything against me, but the fact that you've not done anything for me. Still, I will do for you. I will gladly bless you. And so you can see how both ways are, seen in her quote as well. And within that, we are going to look at each of those ways today. We're going to look at specific accounts found in the scripture that speak to these ways, that illustrate these ways. And I want to encourage you to listen in, ask questions if you'd like, and try to identify which way is more like you, and in what respect you can improve. So join us, listen in, chime in, participate, be a part of our show today, and take note, of the lesson, and think, identify, and improve. But right now, at this very moment, we're going to step away to our first commercial break. We'll be right back.
Are you on the edge of your seat and wanting more? Stay tuned as we go on a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Insights to Incite with Brandon Lawson right here on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Are you seeking a speaker or coach who speaks life into your people? If so, look no further. Brandon Lawson is one who will inspire and motivate his audience, as well as empathize and relate to all. Reach out to Brandon and let him be your speaker and life coach by sending an email to brandon@connectandimpact.net or by calling him at 513-708-1517. Brandon looks forward to speaking with you, to you, and for you. Let's connect and impact today. Insights to Incite, a real show with real-life messages. This show, which can be found on radio, TV, and our podcast, gives us insight to incite us to action and to excellence. Watch and or listen to Insights to Incite live at noon Eastern Time every Thursday on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Check out our past episodes on iHeartRadio, YouTube, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Join us each week, and together we will escape the mundane. We are back with more Insights to Incite, so get ready and tune in to listen and watch. Now once again, let's join Brandon Lawson.
Just a few minutes ago, I said, let me encourage us to not be a friend only because of, but to also be a friend in spite of. But why? Why do I say not be a friend only because of? Well, the reason is simple. I say this because, you see, because of, it warrants an appropriate response. It's like that reciprocation of sorts. Because you've been good, naturally, I should be good. I should even want to be good to you if you've been good to me. It naturally reciprocates itself. So, because of, indeed, does have its place. And I mention that right now because the two accounts found in the scripture that I want us to look further into today, in these two accounts, we will find that both measures are found in each of these accounts. When I say both measures, meaning that both the because of and the in spite of are brought to light. And if you'd like to follow along with me, this first account that we'll be looking at will be found in 1 Samuel chapter 17. I'll be starting it near the tail end of the chapter. It'll be verse 57 to be exact. Get that right here. And in this part of the scripture, the text, this is right after David had defeated the Philistine giant, Goliath. So, beginning in verse 57, it says, "When David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Saul said to him, 'Whose son are you, young man?' 'The son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem,' David answered." Then we go into chapter 18. When David had finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan committed himself to David and loved him as much as he loved himself. Saul kept David with him from that day on and did not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself. Then Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his military tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. David marched out with the army and was successful in everything Saul sent him to do. Saul put him in command of the soldiers, which pleased all the people and Saul's servants as well. As the troops were coming back, when David was returning from killing the Philistine, the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with tambourines, with shouts of joy, and with three-stringed instruments. As they celebrated, the women sang, "Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." Saul was furious and resented this song. "They credited tens of thousands to David," he complained, "but they only credited me with thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom?" So Saul watched David jealously from that day forward. And this sets in motion what we're going to see in the rest of this section that I'm going to read from 1 Samuel, where Saul is out to end David. And there were multiple attempts he made at trying to kill him. As we continue. The next day, an evil spirit sent from God took control of Saul, and he began to rave inside the palace. David was playing the lyre as usual, but Saul was holding a spear, and he threw it, thinking, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David got away from him twice. Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with David, but had left Saul. Therefore, Saul reassigned David and made him commander over 1,000 men. David led the troops and continued to be successful in all his activities because the Lord was with him. When Saul observed that David was very successful, he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he was leading their troops. Saul told David, "Here's my oldest daughter, Merab. I'll give her to you as a wife, if you will be a warrior to me and fight the Lord's battles." But Saul was actually thinking to himself, he was thinking, my hand doesn't need to be against him. Let the hand of the Philistines be against him. Then David responded, "Who am I? And what is my family or my father's clan in Israel that I should become the king's son-in-law?" When it was time to give Saul's daughter Merab to David, she was given to Adriel, the Meholathite, as a wife. David's marriage to Michal. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and when it was reported to Saul, it pleased him. "I'll give her to him," Saul thought. "She'll be a trap for him, and the hand of the Philistines will be against him." So Saul said to David a second time, "You can now be my son-in-law." Saul then ordered his servants, "Speak to David in private and tell him, 'Look, the king is pleased with you, and all his servants love you. Therefore you should become the king's son-in-law.'" Saul's servants reported these words directly to David, but he replied, "Is it trivial in your sight to become the king's son-in-law? I am a poor man who is common." The servants reported back to Saul, "These are the words David spoke." Then Saul replied, "Say this to David, 'The king desires no other bride price except 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies.'" Actually, Saul intended to cause David's death at the hands of the Philistines. When the servants reported these terms to David, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. Before the wedding day arrived, David and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. He brought their foreskins and presented them as full payment to the king to become his son-in-law. Then Saul gave his daughter Michal to David as his wife. Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved him, and he became even more afraid of David. As a result, Saul was David's enemy from then on. Every time the Philistine commanders came out to fight, David was more successful than all of Saul's officers, so his name became well known. Chapter 19. Saul ordered his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David, but Saul's son Jonathan liked David very much. So he told him, "My father Saul intends to kill you. Be on your guard in the morning and hide in a secret place and stay there. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are and talk to him about you. When I see what he says, I'll tell you." Jonathan spoke well of David to his father, Saul. He said to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David. He hasn't sinned against you. In fact, his actions have been a great advantage to you. He took his life in his hands when he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. So why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David for no reason?" Saul listened to Jonathan's advice and swore an oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed." So Jonathan summoned David and told him all these words. Then Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as he did before. When war broke out again, David went out and fought against the Philistines. He defeated them with such a great force that they fled from him. Now an evil spirit sent from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his palace holding a spear. David was playing the lyre, and Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear. As the spear struck the wall, David eluded Saul, ran away, and escaped that night. Saul sent agents to David's house to watch for him and kill him in the morning, but his wife Michal warned David, "If you don't escape tonight, you will be dead tomorrow." So she lowered David from the window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took the household idol and put it on the bed, placed some goat hair on its head, and covered it with a garment. When Saul sent agents to seize David, Michal said, "He's sick." Saul sent the agents back to see David and said, "Bring him on his bed so I can kill him." When the messengers arrived, to their surprise, The household idol was on the bed with some goat hair on its head. Saul asked Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this? You sent my enemy away, and he has escaped." She answered him, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?' So David fled and escaped and went to Samuel at Ramah and told him everything Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel left and stayed at Naioth. When it was reported to Saul that David was at Naioth and Ramah, he sent agents to seize David. However, when they saw the group of prophets prophesying with Samuel leading them, the Spirit of God came on Saul's agents, and they also started prophesying. When they reported to Saul, he sent other agents, and they also began prophesying. So Saul tried again and sent a third group of agents, and even they began prophesying. Then Saul himself went to Ramah. He came to the large cistern at Secu, looked around, and asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" "At Naioth and Ramah," someone said. So he went to Naioth and Ramah. The Spirit of God also came on him as he walked along. He prophesied until he entered Naioth and Ramah. So here we can see, as we look in this situation, we see the because of with Jonathan, as we saw there in verses 4 and 5 in chapter 19. Jonathan said to his father Saul, it reads, "The king should not sin against his servant David. He hasn't sinned against you. In fact, his actions have been a great advantage to you. He took his life in his hands when he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. So why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David for no reason?" We saw that, as I read previously. But there, David is being protected by Saul's son Jonathan. And you can see the because of, I'm not going to be a party to shedding innocent blood. This guy's actually been good, is what Jonathan is saying to his father. And you see the because of there, but you also can see the in spite of. And you see this because of and in spite of with Saul's daughter Michal and how she protected David. She would not allow the agents that came to seize David to kill him to get to him. She notified him, let him out so he could escape. And, all the while, both Jonathan and Michal, stood against their father. So there's the in spite of. Here, Jonathan favored David over his father. He stood against his father. He said, "I will protect you, David." In spite of the one who wants to kill you being my own dad. And Michal did the same thing. So there we have it. You can see, the because of and the in spite of playing out in this account here in Scripture. The flesh and blood were not reason enough to concede to such evil. David had not done anything to Saul or his family that he should deserve this. And so Jonathan nor Michal would allow for David to be struck down and killed by their father. What you actually see here, what we see in Jonathan and David, is a portrait of true friendship. And just what is true friendship? Well, it was Woodrow Wilson who quipped, "True friendship is the only cement that will ever hold the world together." Yes. And Aristotle succinctly stated it in actually two of his quotes. He said, "A true friend is one soul in two bodies." Then on another occasion, he just flipped the script a bit, but basically said the same thing. He says, "Friendship is two souls inhabiting one body. But that's true friendship is truly united. You're united. You're knitted together. You're like you know being an extension of the same person, and that's what we see here. You know, Now for this second account that I want to share with you, I'll be reading from the book of Genesis, the very first book in the Old Testament. We'll find in Genesis chapter 37, beginning in verse 1, said, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons, because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, Listen to this dream I had. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf stood up, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. Are you really going to reign over us? His brothers asked him. Are you really going to rule us? So they hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream and told it to his brothers. Look, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. He told his father and brothers, but his father rebuked him. What kind of dream is this that you have had? He said. Are your mother and brothers and I going to come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And from this point, we see a whole slew of things that spin out of this, that begin right after this, And the first is Joseph's brothers. They first were going to kill him, but they lowered him into a pit, or some translation might say a cistern, and then they saw a caravan of Midianites coming by. So rather than shed innocent blood, which, one of the eldest of the brothers, I believe it was, Reuben, Reuben said to them, don't shed blood. It says, throw him into this wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from their hands and return him to his father. But then when they saw this caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead and their camels, then Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And they agreed. So his brothers sold him. He was sold into slavery. And then from that point, he was brought to where, when he was in slavery, he found favor with Potiphar. And Potiphar put him in command over all his household and trusted everything to him. Yet Potiphar's wife, who noticed David to be a very nice-looking man, she framed him. She tried to come on to him, but he would have none of it. No, he even said to her, your husband, my master, has entrusted everything to me. How can I sin against him? He told her, I cannot. And so, then she grabbed a hold of him and pulled him toward her, to which he rolled out. He rolled out of her arms and fled. And as he did, she held on to his robe. Then once her husband's servants got home, she said, "Look, see what this nasty Hebrew did? He came on to me." And she framed him and defamed him. And therefore, he was thrown into the dungeon, thrown into a prison. And then we'll see in chapter 40 of Genesis, he interprets two dreams. One is for the cupbearer and the other for the chief butler, or the chief baker, they say. But he interprets their dreams, and then a chapter later, in chapter 41, we see that the Pharaoh has had two dreams, and none of his wise men can interpret it. And so Joseph gets called upon to interpret his dreams, and he does. And from that, Pharaoh recognized the wisdom in Joseph and how he had a very special gift, and he recognized how God was with him. And therefore, and within the interpretation of the dream, Joseph shared how God would show the Pharaoh that the first coming up from that point would be 7 years of great abundance, of plentiful harvest. And then following after that would be 7 years of famine. So he suggested to the Pharaoh that the Pharaoh should, during the 7 plentiful years, should set someone over that to store up grain and store up food and seed in the storehouses to prepare for the 7 years of barren land, of famine, of lack. And Pharaoh did just that, and he chose Joseph because of Joseph being full of the wisdom of God, having the favor of God, and having insight, able to interpret these dreams that no one else could. So he set Joseph as the one over that. And this famine not only affected Egypt, it was widespread and went across all the world. And so people from all over the world were flocking, were coming in droves, coming to Egypt to get grain, to get seed, so they would have food for their loved ones, so that they would not die. And the Hebrews, the Jewish race, was no exception to the rule. They too were in dire need because of the famine. And Jacob, or Israel, the father of Joseph and his brothers, him hearing of how the Lord had blessed, his blessing was upon the land of Egypt, and how they managed to have food and grain there, he sent his sons to go to Egypt and to get grain, to get food, to grain and seed, to bring it back, lest they die of starvation, of hunger. And so they go to Egypt. They're dispersed to go there. And there they go. And as they go to Egypt, they are, caught up. Joseph sees them, and he knows who they are. Yet he doesn't reveal himself immediately. As early as chapter 42 is where we see his brothers go there on their first trip to Egypt for this. And Joseph knows who they are, but he doesn't say anything. But in chapter 45, he cannot contain it any longer. And he comes forth. He spills it out. And he shares with them just who he is. Yes, we see this. And we want to read beginning in verse 11. Beginning in verse 11, chapter 45, beginning in verse 1, reading through verse 11. It says here that Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all his attendants. So he called out, "Send everyone away from us, away from me." No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be worried or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Now quickly to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near me, you, your children, grandchildren, your sheep, cattle, and all you have. There I will sustain you, for there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you, your household, and everything you have will become destitute.'" And so, we see here that, his brothers were terrified in his presence. As you can imagine, they're the very ones that were going to kill him. Then they sold him to slavery and all this other that came about thereafter, and a whole string of things, being put in prison even, for something he had not even done. Well, in recognizing this, he his brothers, they went back to get their father and told him, and they came back. But as we move ahead, and we see the real test comes as we move into chapter 49, as Jacob their father gives his last words, and at the beginning of chapter 50, Jacob is buried. Well, now the dread really sets in, because their thoughts were, what would Joseph do to us now that our father's gone? Our father will never know. Is he going to really get even with us? What will he do to us now? Well, let's turn to chapter 50, and beginning in verse 15, I want to read. Tells us, Genesis chapter 50, verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, "If Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the suffering we caused him." So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before he died, your father gave a command. Say this to Joseph: 'Please forgive your brother's transgression and their sin, the suffering they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.'" Joseph wept when their message came to him. Then his brothers also came to him, bowed down before him, and said, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So, here in this account, Joseph spared his brothers. But why? Well, he recognized God the Father. First, Joseph says in verse 19, "Am I in the place of God?" He recognizes that it's not for him to strike down his own flesh and blood, his own family. Then, second, Joseph recognizes how God the Father had orchestrated this, that he orchestrated this and prepared them to be a remnant for the nation of Israel, to carry on the Jewish race. And that Joseph, being an instrumental part of this, he found great delight, and that he played, such a key role, he was such an instrumental part in the Father's plan and the unfolding of the story of the eternal redemption that lives on to this very day. To this day, not only as we read here, but even to our days. So Joseph, in recognizing this, so we got a glimpse of this when he comforted his brothers in chapter 45, and then again here in verse 20 of chapter 50. So here we can see the because of, because he recognized his Father God. And we also see the in spite of, in spite of the fact of what his brothers had did to him. Let's look at the Genesis chapter 50, verses 20 and 21. It says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. So there we see it. Joseph, here, Joseph, he went through such ungodly treatment, was falsely accused, was wrongfully mistreated, by his brothers, was framed and defamed by Potiphar's wife, was unjustly put in prison. Yet something we see with Joseph, as we saw with David, was in spite of all the hardship, all the suffering he had to endure, God was with him. God blessed him. And that's what we see throughout the story of Joseph, and that's how he was promoted to second in command of Egypt. And that's how he got in a place to where he could help to carry on this legacy and to carry out the remnant for his brothers, to carry on the Jewish race as he did. Friends, there's the two accounts of both showing a because of and an in spite of. We'll be right back.
Wow, that was insightful. Stay tuned as we go on a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Insights to Incite right here on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV. Are you seeking a speaker or coach who speaks life into your people? If so, look no further. Brandon Lawson is one who will inspire and motivate his audience, as well as empathize and relate to all. Reach out to Brandon and let him be your speaker and life coach by sending an email to brandon@connectandimpact.net or by calling him at 513-708-1517. Brandon looks forward to speaking with you, to you, and for you. Let's connect and impact today. Insights to Incite, a real show with real-life messages. This show, which can be found on radio, TV, and our podcast, gives us insight to incite us to action and to excellence. Watch and or listen to Insights to Incite live at noon Eastern Time every Thursday on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV. Check out our past episodes on iHeartRadio, YouTube, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Join us each week, and together we will escape the mundane. We are back with more Insights to Incite, so get ready and tune in to listen and watch. Now once again, let's join Brandon Lawson.
Which of you Which do you more identify with? Which one are you? Are you more of a because of or an in spite of person? May I assert to you that a true friend is both. Yes, a true friend is both a because of and an in spite of. And while true friends won't make your problems disappear, they won't disappear when you are facing problems. Yes. Friends, perhaps you've been blessed to have such a friend or to be such a friend. No, and you were bonded to that person. And that bond was such that you were so bonded inside and out to where it was like you were an extension of each other. You were, you know, one and the same. That's when, we hear those soulmates and stuff like that, we can feel one another in the depths of our soul. Friends, let's be a true friend to those we know. Let's be that light. Let's be a Joseph. Friends, that pretty much wraps it up for today's show. We want to thank you for joining us today and tuning in. And we hope you'll be back here with us next Thursday at 12 noon Eastern. And, I realize that, you're not always going to agree with everything I say. You won't always see it as I see it. None of us will ever see everything eye to eye. Nonetheless, I invite you to join me here on Eye to Eye, Insights to Incite, every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern. And we thank you once again. And as we sign off, I want Roxy to read this quote that comes from Edith Wharton. Thank you.
There is one friend in the life of each of us who seems not a separate person, however dear and beloved, but an expansion and interpretation of oneself, the very meaning of one's soul.
Wow, what an insightful show. Thanks for listening in and watching today. If you missed any part of today's show or any other episode, check it out on iHeartRadio, YouTube, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Now take today's insight and utilize it. Incite yourself to action and to excellence in the week ahead, and join us again next Thursday and every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern Time for another insightful session with Brandon Lawson as he speaks to us and shares some more insights to incite right here on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV.